One of the most common questions that Christians ask is, how can I know God's will? How can I know God's will? We think about young people asking that, thinking about what college to go to and what career to take and who to marry and so on. And then in normal everyday occurrences of life. Last week I had two decisions, or a choice between two decisions, and I found myself praying, God, what would you have me do? And a very common occurrence for us as Christians is to ask this question, what is God's will for my life? And so we're in week 2 in about a 6-week series on how we can know God's will. And if you will listen and pay attention and apply what we learned today, you will forever know the answer to this question, how can we know God's will? Now, let me just say a word to you as teacher. I want to encourage you to say that to your people this week. I want to encourage you to say that to your people every week during this series, that if you will listen and pay attention and apply what we talk about, here is the benefit you can expect to have. The introduction should answer the question, why should you listen to me today? The introduction should answer the question, why should you listen to me? And the introduction to a series ought to answer the question, this is why you ought to show up every single week and not miss any weeks. And let me make 2 observations by way of overview. The first one is this: God's will is more about who you are than where you are. God's will is more about that you be sanctified, that you be transformed by the renewing of your mind, as we talked about last week. God's will is more about that you living a holy life, that you living a life of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. And whether you live that life in Boston or Austin or San Antonio or Los Angeles, in many cases, God doesn't really care. And let me read to you a classic section. Anytime I write a lesson on God's will, I'll nearly always include this section from John MacArthur. And he says, okay, let me give you the final principle, but hold on to your seat. You may want to jump and shout. If you're doing all 5 of the basic things, they all start with S in his book on God's will. Let me see if I can remember them all. That you are saved, that you are sanctified, that you are spirit-filled, that you are, I think suffering is one of them. I think there's one more, but anyway, I don't remember what that is. But anyway, if you're doing these 5 things, the next principle is this. You ready? Do whatever you want. If those 5 elements of God's will are operating in your life, who is running your wants? God is. The psalmist says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. God does not say he will fulfill all the desires here, but if you are living a godly life, he will give you the right desires. People often say to John MacArthur, why did you go into your present ministry when you had such an enjoyable ministry before in another area? And I always answer, because I wanted to. How would you expect a preacher to answer that question, by the way? If you ask your preacher, why did you come to your